Hello, I'm Kimberly Dutton, and I am interviewing Mrs. Carlene Bass. It is June 17, 2008. Hello.
Hello.
Please tell me about how you came to living in Ashland.
My family moved to Ashland in February of 1935. I was 16 months old. I was an infant, so I had no choice but to move with them. But they moved here because my dad was interested in having his children grow up in a small college community.
Did he also come here for a career, or did he find work here?
He already had a job. He was a traveling salesman. He sold wholesale hardware to small stores in 18 counties and cities in Virginia. So he could, as long as he lived in this general area.
What community or neighborhood did you first live in?
I was born in Caroline County, Virginia, in a place called Frog Level. So I'm a native Frog-Levillian. But I don't remember living there since I was so young when we moved to Ashland.
How many people lived in your home?
Just me and my mother and my father. In 1943, my brother was born.
What was Ashland like when you were growing up?
A wonderful place to grow up, particularly with the college here. Everybody made you feel so good about yourself. You had no problems with self-esteem because everybody always told you you did a good job and complimented you. You could play in the street. You could ride. I used to roller skate on England Street. No way could you roller skate on England Street today. We used to play along the railroad track. That was when the coal trains came through. We would go up and get little lumps of coal and bring them back home and draw on the sidewalk and play hopscotch with the lumps of coal from the train tracks. It was just, you rode your bicycle to school. You were not allowed, if you lived in the town of Ashland, you were not allowed to ride the school bus. You either had to walk, or somebody had to take you to school, or you rode your bike. And so I rode my bicycle to school, to Henry Clay School, elementary school, and high school.
About how far away was that?
Probably about 12 blocks, city blocks, something like that. I guess between a half mile and a mile. I really don't know. I never measured it.
What were Ashland's most colorful characters when you were growing up?
There were so many. There was Eddie Rakeleaves, who did odd jobs around town, an older black gentleman. There was a wonderful lady who was a writer who lived on Center Street in Ashland. She was a member of the Bryan family, which is a newspaper family in Richmond. And she wrote westerns under the name of Clinton Dangerfield, and we always thought she was a strange character. Then we had some other people in the Hughes family who ran the drugstore, and they were always colorful people. They were always doing something entertaining for the rest of us. And there was Snookums, a black man who stayed at the barber shop, and just the town was full of characters. It looked to me as though when some of them died, or mostly they died here in town, then somebody else would either move in or someone else would evolve to take their place, because Ashland's always had characters.
Do you have any other memories of the drugstore while it was still in operation?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That was the hangout place. That's where you went after school, and you went in and got an ice cream. Big ice cream cone was 5 cents. One of my strong memories that I remember I love strawberry ice cream, and I went in one day and got a strawberry ice cream, and I came back out and I was running across the railroad track to meet some of my friends, and the strawberry ice cream popped right out of my cone and fell down in the dirty railroad tracks. And nickels were hard to come by in those days, so I went back to the drugstore with my empty cone, and told them what happened, and they gave me 2 more dips of strawberry ice cream, so that they were really nice and thoughtful because they knew that I didn't do it on purpose. My teachers used to go in there after school, particularly in high school. And one of my good friends right now, who was my 8th grade math teacher, it was the first time I ever saw her smoking a cigarette. And we thought that was really cool that the teacher was smoking. She tried to hide the cigarette when we came in, but we saw it anyway, and we thought that was really cool that she was a smoker. But the drugstore was a place to hang out, meet your friends. It was on Center Street where, let's see, what's in that building now is the saddle shop, I think. I think that would have been the drugstore.
What are some of your earliest childhood memories?
Some of my earliest childhood memories. Playing in the street, playing in town, going to Sunday school and church at Duncan Memorial Church, which was in what is now the old chapel at Randolph-Macon. Taking piano lessons. I started taking piano lessons when I was very young, and by the time I was 9 or 10 years old, I was playing the piano at Sunday school and church. And in those days, almost all the Randolph-Macon professors lived in town, and the majority of them went to Duncan Memorial to church, so you got to know everybody. And it was a wonderful place to grow up. Another thing that I really remember was that living on College Avenue, I was able to walk up to Randolph-Macon, and in Peel Hall, which is now the administration building, that used to be the library. That was the library. And when you walked in the front door of the library, to your left, under the steps that came down, was a small set of shelves that housed children's books. It had one light bulb hanging on a cord coming down, so it was very dark. But being a child, I had good eyes and I could see, and that was my library. So many kids growing up in those days didn't have access to a library. We didn't even have one at school, and so that was a wonderful place to learn about, to get books and to learn about books. I didn't like to go in there by myself though, because when you walked in the front door, it was marble and very dark. And there were some busts of people, Roman figures and famous figures and so forth. And the college boys in those days delighted in painting the eyeballs red or painting the fingernails red if the statue had hands on it. And for a little kid going in by herself, that was real scary. So I usually would wait until a friend could go with me, and we felt safe going in together. There's no danger, but kids make up all kinds of things.
Did the college students play any other kinds of pranks?
Oh, yeah. Oh, all the time. Particularly Halloween. There was a Latin professor, Dr. Bowen, who lived on College Avenue, and he rode his bicycle everywhere. And every All Saints Day, the day after Halloween, November 1st, you could always come up when I would be going to school that morning, or even if it was a weekend, you'd come up the street and Dr. Bowen's bicycle would always be at the top of the telephone pole. They did that every year. They would take people's lawn chairs and hang them from the telephone poles. Nothing destructive, just fun pranks.
Did the townspeople have any specific reaction to these pranks?
No, just laugh. It's just college students having a good time. Yeah.
In what ways did having a college in the town affect your life?
Well, I've already mentioned the library and the contact with the professors. I don't know that everybody that grew up in Ashland had that same contact, but my parents were very as I said, my father wanted to move to Ashland because of the college being here. He had wanted to come to college here, but he didn't have any money, and in those days, no one really encouraged him and told him about scholarships and things of that nature, and so he did the next best thing by moving here and vicariously coming to Randolph-Macon. So, yeah, it had a profound effect on me, being associated with all those different professors. And as I said, particularly from going to Duncan Memorial Church, that I really had a lot of contact with them.
What do you think about relationships between the town and the college?
Now, present day?
Either or.
I think the relationship between the town and the college is very good right now. Over the years, there have been some problems, but for the most part, I think there's been a good relationship. Town and gown has been a good relationship. Of course, any big institution within a town is going to have there are going to be some conflicts, but usually they are resolved. There haven't been anything that we couldn't talk about and get straightened out. But as I said, growing up, almost all the professors lived in town, and so consequently, they were a part of the community. And now, not many of them live here, but still enough, and we have members of the college community on the town council at the moment. So I think the relationship is very, very good between the town and the college.
What was your relationship with college when you were growing up, maybe high school or after you graduated high school?
Well, growing up, I've said that I had a good relationship with a lot of the faculty people over here. I could have attended Randolph-Macon because I lived in town, and lots of well, not lots, but some town students did attend Randolph-Macon. As long as you didn't require dormitory space, you could come to school here. However, I left town. I went to Murray, Washington. But during my high school years, my relationship with the college students was just great because every year, it was an all-male school. So a young woman growing up in Ashland in those days, it was like heaven on earth. If you didn't like the crop of guys that were here this year, just wait till September and a new crop came in. You could look them over. And fraternity parties and dances and football games and basketball games and baseball games. And, we were over at the college all the time doing something. The high school boys didn't like it because they had to compete for dates and so forth, and it was much more exciting to date a college guy than it was to date a high school guy. While I was in high school and college, I never took any classes here, but I could have taken some, and I did take a class later on in graduate school. I had a class under Dr. Tom Inge later on, but it was through VCU, even though it was taught here at Randolph-Macon. Say the question again. What did you ask about just the relationship with the town, right? And growing up with the college, yeah. Well, that was the main thing. It was a wonderful, wonderful place to be, and I still have friends today that I met, young men that I met when they were young men coming to college. Now they're old men, and we're still good friends.
What was the town's view of college students dating local girls? Was there any problems with parents or?
Some parents didn't let their children date college students. My parents never objected because I would invite the college students to come home, so my parents would meet them, and my mom and dad loved college students, and so they loved having them visit in their house. They always enjoyed it. Some parents didn't let their daughters come over here, but that, of course, didn't keep the daughters from coming. They came anyway. The parents just didn't know about it. They sneaked around.
Have you seen any significant changes in the college as years have gone by?
Oh, yeah, significant changes. Yeah, one being, as I said, the faculty. Not as many of the faculty members live in Ashland anymore. Of course, the fact that the college is now co-ed, and the college has grown somewhat. Not tremendously, but it has grown somewhat, but it's still a major influence on this town. And this town wouldn't be what it is without the college.
What do you think about college involvement in the town, such as fundraisers or events?
Oh, I think that's great. Whenever we do anything together, I think that's wonderful. The dance marathon sort of thing, and anything that we do, particularly this 150-year celebration that we're in the midst of right now in Ashland. There's a lot of college involvement with that. In fact, President Lindgren is one of the co-chairs, along with the mayor, Faye Pritchard. And so that's a good relationship between the two. And there are many events throughout the year that the college and the town participate in together, and I think that's wonderful to do that. One of the things that I didn't mention when we were talking about growing up in Ashland, the Methodist Youth Fellowship, which met at Duncan Memorial Church, which was the old chapel. Many of the college men belonged to that group because in those days Randolph-Macon trained an awful lot of United Methodist ministers. They weren't United Methodists in those days, but Methodist ministers. And so there was a very strong youth fellowship here. And in fact, most high school age kids from other churches in town, the Episcopals and the Presbyterians and the Baptists and so forth, would come to the Methodist Youth Fellowship. And we had a large group. And so we got to meet a lot of Randolph-Macon students that way. And there was a lot of close cooperation between the two groups.
Do you think that has changed over the years?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. We don't, I don't know that there's any cooperation between those young groups today. Not that I know of, and not when my children were growing up.
Have you attended any other churches, or have you stayed with Duncan
No, I
Memorial?
stayed with Duncan Memorial. Joined Duncan Memorial in 1944. And I'm still a member today.
Who are some of the leaders, and what do they do in the church?
In the church, the leaders in the church? Oh, there have been so many over the years. Dr. Moreland, who was president of Randolph-Macon, when I was growing up, he was a strong leader in the church and was until his death in the, I don't know what year, the 1980s, I guess. He was a strong leader. And Dr. Terry, who taught Bible at the college, and Dr. Haley, who taught Greek at the college, they were all strong leaders in the church. Some of our ministers at Duncan Memorial have been graduates of Randolph-Macon. And there's always, Duncan Memorial is also the chapel of Randolph-Macon College, and so therefore there's always been a connection. And I do think that in the last few years that connection has strengthened. For a good while, I'd say in the 60s and the 70s, that connection waned quite a bit, but it seems to be stronger now. Not as strong as it could be, but it is stronger. Mm-hmm.
And what do you feel about your church's involvement in the community?
My church's involvement in the community? Oh, Duncan Memorial is very involved in the community, and in many, many ways, outreach programs, and very strong participant in the ACES, Ashland Community Emergency Services Program, and Bible School is very much a part of the community. That happens to be going on right now. So there's a lot of outreach from Duncan Memorial, and outreach to the college community.
Could you tell me more about that?
the outreach to the college community. There are weekly worship service programs offered to college students. There are some, we have had dinners on a weekly basis with Bible study connected with that. We've had just different programs sponsored by the church. And now, right now, there's a Bailey program at the college, which is to prepare young men and women for the ministry, and there's a connection to Duncan Memorial because of that. Duncan was the first president of Randolph-Macon, and that's who the church is named for. So there's always been a connection. And of course, Randolph-Macon's a Methodist college, and Duncan Memorial is a Methodist church, so there's always been a connection.
Okay, I'm going to move on to your personal life.
Okay.
And I would like to ask you a little bit about your education.
Okay.
What schools did you attend while you were living in Ashland?
I started school at a little private school called the Mrs. Herndon School. There were 3 old maid school teachers that ran a school in their home on South James Street. My parents sent me to that school because my birthday is October the 6th, and public school cutoff for going to school was September the 30th, so I missed by 6 days being able to go to public school because I was 5 years old, and there were 6 days that I wasn't 6, and so I couldn't go. So my parents paid, and I think I remember my dad saying that he paid $5 a month for me to go to this private school with these 3 old maid teachers. It was an absolutely marvelous beginnings of education. They only taught first and second grades. There were probably no more than 15, 16 people there. You had 3 teachers. It was total individual attention. It was the best education anybody could have gotten to begin with. And I went there for the 2 years that they had that. Then in 3rd grade, I had to move to public school, just up the street on James Street, Henry Clay Elementary School. And I started school there in 3rd grade, and after about 2 weeks, I started having pains in my stomach, and I didn't want to go to school, and I'd wake up in the morning and cry, and my mom would make me go to school, and I'd tell the teacher I was sick, and I would come home, and that went on for about 9 days until finally my mom said one day, I'm going to go to school with you, and I'm going to stay there and not let you come home. And I was so embarrassed to have my mother at school that when we had our first recess in the morning, we called it little recess at like 10:15. I went out in the hall with my mom and I begged her to come home and promised her that I would never, ever, ever leave school again if she would just go home and not embarrass me anymore. And she went home, and so I stayed, and I never did that again. I now know that as I got older, as became an adult, I now know what the problem was. I had come from that tiny little school with all that individual attention with 3 teachers, and suddenly I was in a classroom with 30 or so kids and 1 teacher. And it was so different, and they were all psychosomatic illnesses, but it didn't matter. My stomach still hurt really badly. But anyway, I stayed at school. My mom didn't have to come back with me anymore. And I graduated from Henry Clay High School in 1950. And I went to Mary Washington College in Fredericksburg. In those days, it was Mary Washington College of the University of Virginia, because it was the women's division of the University of Virginia, because women were not allowed to go to the University of Virginia if they were boarding students. Now, it was just like Randolph-Macon. If you lived in Albemarle County or Charlottesville, you could go to UVA as a woman, but you couldn't be a boarding student. So Mary Washington and UVA were under the same Board of Regents. I graduated from I graduated from Mary Washington in 1954 with a major in psychology and a minor in social studies. And I, over the years, have taken graduate courses at William and Mary and VCU and but that's my education.
When did you come back to Ashland?
I came back. I was away those 4 years in college, and then I got married, and I lived away for 2 years, and I returned to Ashland in the summer of 1956.
Did you see any major changes in the town, or was it all the same?
No, it's mostly the same. It's no big changes. And the big changes don't come in Ashland until the 60s and 70s.
What kind of changes were those?
Well, the influx of population, growth in the population. Interstate 95 opened in the late 50s. That was the big thing, because when Interstate 95 opened, then that caused the gas stations and the fast food restaurants and so forth to grow up along Route 54 east. Not in the town of Ashland, because it was on the outskirts, but that was the major reason for the growth in restaurants and gas stations and things of that nature, because of it was big exit on 95.
Did any of those restaurants or new businesses threaten the older businesses?
No, because there weren't that many restaurants. There were very few places to eat in Ashland those days. If we wanted to go out to eat, which was a rare privilege in those days, you didn't go out to eat the way you do today, but you almost had to go to Richmond. There were a few places that you could eat in Ashland, but not many. So no, it really didn't. It just brought more to the town.
Are there any stores that you used to go to that are no longer in business?
Oh yeah, lots of stores that are no longer in business. Hughes's Drugstore, I've already mentioned that one. Barnes's Drugstore, which is where Homemades for Suzanne by Suzanne's is now. The bank that I had my meager little savings in, Hanover National Bank. The building is right behind the train station. There was a general store, penny candy store, Mayberg's, just past the Iron Horse restaurant now. The Iron Horse was that building was a department store, D.B. Cox and Company department store. Where the Ashland Coffee and Tea is now was in later years, by the time my children came along, that was also a department store. That's where I bought a lot of my children's clothes. Now, the one constant that's downtown, probably the only thing that's been there consistently the whole time, is Cross Brothers Grocery Store. And they've been in business. They've got a sign in the window now, 96 years. So that is the one constant. Where the Mexican restaurant is down on the railroad track was the movie theater. And the new movie theater that was opened in 1948 is on England Street. That's not in operation right now, but it's still there. The building is there.
Did you ever see any movies at this theater?
Oh, absolutely. I went to the movies all the time at the old movie theater down on Center Street. This, of course, is before the days of integration in this part of the country, and the movie theater, white people sat downstairs, and in those days, colored people sat upstairs. And they had an entrance from the side, but they saw the same movies we did. We just sat in different places. And then when the new theater opened in 1948, we're still in time of segregation. The new theater was for the white people, and the old theater was totally for black people. And so, oh yeah, you went to the movies. Well, that was the cheapest entertainment. When I was a child, you could go to the movies for 9 cents, and I think popcorn was 5 cents. So if your parents would give you a dime and a nickel, you'd come home with a penny. And but a dime and a nickel weren't easy to come by in those days. So It's not like you think, oh, a dime and a nickel, that's nothing. But a dime and a nickel was your parents just didn't hand them out just for so.
Did you have to do any chores to earn them?
I didn't. I was pretty spoiled. I guess some people did have to, but and I didn't have an allowance until I went to college. I would just ask my mom or dad for a nickel or a dime or whatever, and sometimes I get it and sometimes I didn't.
Do you have any fond memories of any of the other businesses you've mentioned? Such as?
Oh, there was a restaurant in between what is now Crosses and Hanover Mortgage Company on the corner. There was a college shop in there that you could go and get hamburgers and drinks and things like that. And then in 1948, when the new movie theater opened, the little building right next to the movie theater, which today is a recording studio called Slip Disc, that was a snack bar. And that was wonderful. That's where we all hung out from my last 2 years of high school. I mean, we were in there all the time. That was the place to be. It was just like you hear about from the 50s. If you see the musical show Grease or something like that, it was like that. Yeah.
What were the other gathering places in your neighborhood?
Well, as I said, the snack bar was the big gathering place. And then things connected with the high school. And the high school building is no longer there. The high school was right next to the elementary school, but the high school building has been torn down and it's now a parking lot. And also when I was a junior, I suppose, in high school, probably about 1948 or 49, right after the war, the community built the Ashland War Memorial Building, which is now owned by the school system, and it's on property of the Henry Clay School. And that was a gathering place. That was a good place to go and have dances and have fun. And Randolph-Macon was a big gathering place for us. We had no gym in our school, and Randolph-Macon was very generous and would let us use what today is called the alumni gym. And we would use that. That's where we played our basketball games and so forth. And we hung out a lot at Randolph-Macon.
You mentioned the war. Could you tell me more about living in Ashland during that time?
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody was involved in the war effort. It was, a major thing. There's so many things connected with the war. One of them, that's when I learned to knit, and I still knit today. There was a lady that lived on College Avenue, Miss Sneed, who was a volunteer for the Red Cross, and you could go to her house and get yarn, and then you would make it. My mother and her friends knitted sweaters and things of that nature, but those of us that were little kids, by that time I was 10, 11 years old, we just knitted squares. They were just all knitting, and we'd knit squares, and then our mothers would take them and knit them together and sew them together and make lap robes for the injured service people who were in the hospitals in wheelchairs and so forth. So we thought we were really contributing, and we were contributing to the war effort. And it also, I learned a valuable skill that I still have today. We also saved tin foil and any kind of metal, anything that was made of metal, and you took it to school and you piled it up in the yard of the school, and every month, I guess, an army truck would come and pick it up and take it to recycling places so that it could be used. And so you always felt like when you were taking pieces of metal or anything that you found like that, even tin foil off of chewing gum or tin foil off of cigarette packs, you'd ball it up and make tin foil balls and take it and put it on that pile. And you would think as you were putting it on there that was going to be made into bullets to shoot the Germans and the Japanese. And there was and a great patriotic feel about the whole thing. There also were air raid warnings. We had an air raid warning system, and everybody had black oak curtains that they could put over their windows and doors. And when the air raid siren would go off, you'd have to hang the big heavy covers over your windows if you wanted to keep any lights on in your house, because the air raid warden would be walking around town and with a flashlight with a covering over the end, so he could barely see where he was going, but you couldn't have any lights on in your house. There was up on Chapman Street, there was an aerial watch station that when I was a junior and senior in high school, no, I wouldn't have been that old. No, it had been before that. It was probably when I was about a freshman, about 1945, just about when the war was ending. You could volunteer to go up there and watch planes going. And any plane, I mean, there weren't that many planes in the sky, so, and you could hear them coming. It was not like jets today that fly so high. You'd watch the plane coming, and you had binoculars, and you would read the markings on the plane, and then you had a telephone, and you could call in and say such and such a plane was coming over, and then the air traffic control would make sure that that was a legitimate plane coming over. I mean, it always made you feel like that you were going to be attacked at any minute. Why anybody would have attacked Ashland, I don't know. But we are between Richmond and Norfolk, and so it was. But it made you feel that you were a real part of the war effort. And also the troop trains came through all the time with the soldiers, and you go down to the tracks and wave to the soldiers and yell to them and give them food and that sort of thing. And Randolph-Macon, because it was a men's school, had no students because all the men had gone to war. Dr. Moreland arranged for some Army training to be done here. And so we had soldiers on the campus in training. And in fact, a lot of girls a little bit older than me met their future husbands. And then some of those guys, when they got out of the service, came back and did attend Randolph-Macon. Yeah, so war was that was a big deal.
How did the town accept these trainees? Did they?
I think with open arms. So far as I know, I was young, so I don't remember. But I don't remember any conflicts. But everybody was so wrapped up in the war and the fact that the Germans and the Japanese had to be defeated, that there was such a strong feeling that had to be done. And there was some isolationism in the United States, but I don't ever remember it being evident in Ashland.
Do you remember any other major national events that had significant impact on Ashland?
Not anything like that. Not anything like that war. Now, the Vietnam War, the protest of the Vietnam War, there was some unrest in the town then, because and that probably was due to having college students here who were of draftable age and so forth. And I do remember protests here during that time. But I mean, there were protests all over the United States, protesting everything in those days. I mean, it was the 70s was the time of protest. So there were things. Yeah, I can remember college students standing in front of the post office, which is next to the movie theater. I remember college students standing in front of the post office with posters, anti-war posters and things, and you had to walk around them to get into the post office. But most people just ignored them and went around them and didn't pay any attention to them. But I guess there was some. That was a conflicting time. Yeah. So that had an effect on the town. I don't know of any other profound effect, a major effect. the integration of schools, of course, which occurred in Hanover County the full integration of Hanover County schools occurred in 1969. But pretty much that occurred without any major problems. We had good people in the school system who worked hard to make it work.
So race relations have always been good in the town?
Well, I guess that probably depends on who you ask. But blacks and whites have always lived side by side in Ashland. Even as a child growing up, there were the majority of the black population lived just down Henry Street from the college in an area called Berkeley Town. But blacks also lived in other places in town. And as a child growing up, I remember them being around, but I was always taught to be respectful of black people, and I always had friends in the black community. So, maybe I'm not the right person to answer that question because I don't know about that. I'm sure you get different opinions from different people.
What other morals have you been taught when you were a child, such as respect?
Oh. Well, that probably is the main one, respect, because if you respect yourself and respect other people, but, and being kind and honest and, well, I grew up with parents who were that way, and so just observed their behavior and tried to live that way, and growing up in the church too. Yeah. And all the people around there were so many people around all the time, and everybody knew who you were, so you really couldn't do much without somebody looking over your shoulder. And then, it got to the point you didn't need anybody looking over your shoulder. You would just want to do right because it's the right thing to do.
So it's like a trademark of this small town.
Right, I think so. Mm-hmm.
So tell me about some of your jobs that you've had in Ashland.
Oh, gee. Well, when I was in high school, in the summers, I worked. The very first summer I ever worked, I worked for the hardware company that my dad worked for in Richmond. I had a clerical job at that hardware store and that hardware corporation. And then when I was in college, in the summertime, I worked every summer at the Life Insurance Company of Virginia, which was at 9th and Broad Street. Today, it is the office building for the General Assembly of Virginia. But I worked there every summer and made my spending money for college the next year. Met some wonderful people and was a very good experience. I did clerical work. So that was in Richmond. I don't think I've ever worked in Ashland, except that after I got out of college and after when my husband was in graduate school at Vanderbilt, I worked at George Peabody College for Teachers in clerical position, and then we came to Newport News, and I taught 7th grade in Newport News. And then in the summer of 1956, we moved back to Ashland. And in the fall of 1956, I started teaching U.S. history, 8th grade, at Henry Clay High School, the school I had graduated from. And I taught there until in the late fall, I found out that I was pregnant. And in those days, if you were pregnant, you could not teach school. So I had to go to the principal and tell him that I was pregnant and that I would be leaving at the end of the first semester. You were not allowed to wear maternity clothes in the classroom. And so my mother made me one gray flannel skirt that had an expandable waist because I was very tiny in those days, and I began to gain weight, and I wore that gray skirt every day with a different top. I'm sure the students thought I was too poor to afford another skirt. And I stopped teaching at the end of the first semester in January, and my baby was not born until the 30th of June. But The rules were the rules. Today it sounds ridiculous, but that was the rule, and so I couldn't do that. So I did not work from January of 1957 until I went back to teaching in September of 1969. So I stayed at home during that time. I did do some substitute teaching, and I made some extra money. I played the piano and organ. Almost every Sunday I would play at some church, any church that needed somebody to fill in, and that's how I made my spending money too. And I also typed senior projects for Randolph-Macon students. All Randolph-Macon students in those days had to do a senior project, which was similar to a master's thesis today. And they had to turn in 4 copies, original and 3 carbons, and this is talking of carbon paper days. And I had an old portable typewriter, and I would beat them out on my dining room table at home, and that was another way I made some extra money.
What was it like raising a child in Ashland?
Oh, it was great. Just like when I grew up in Ashland, it was wonderful because the kids could ride their bikes around, and they could play in the street, and they could. You felt safe. I never really worried about my kids because it was a small town atmosphere. They were well taken care of. There was always somebody watching out for them. There was no. I think it was a great place to raise kids. And again, we had the influence of the college. And by the time my kids came along, of course, the schools, now all 3 of my children did go to Henry Clay School, the school I went to. And actually, I've had one grandchild go to that school. That they all went there. But then by that time, the schools were, of course, integrated. And Gandy became the elementary school, and Liberty became the junior high school, and then all my children graduated from Patrick Henry High School.
And what do you feel about their education?
I think Hanover has always had a good school system. We haven't always paid teachers the most money, but I think we've had wonderfully dedicated teachers, and so therefore I think we've all done okay.
So, in the community, what has changed within your lifetime as far as physical appearance is concerned?
Oh, many, many more stores, shops, many, many more houses, improved streets, the water and sewer system and the drainage system. Ashland used to be flooded so often, a hard rain, and you could go swimming in your backyard. That the removal of water has been great. Around the college, I can remember water used to stand around here all the time. Ashland is low. It's the Slashes. It's very low land, and so that's been a big improvement. But lots more houses, and but the railroad track is still here. Now the trains aren't the coal burners anymore, and they don't have the coal on the track, so they're not as dirty as they used to be. Also, not as many railroad crossings. It used to be there was a railroad crossing at every street corner, and that's not true anymore. Now you just have a few railroad crossings, and they all have gates and lights. We didn't have those in the olden days. So people would sometimes not see the train or not be paying attention, and there were more wrecks, car wrecks on the train tracks. But as a child growing up, you were taught, that in those days it was the RF&P Railroad that came through the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, and you were taught growing up, don't try to race the RF&P. You won't win. And you had to be careful and ever mindful, just like when your parents teach you not to look both ways crossing the street. You definitely look both ways at the railroad station.
When were the gates installed? Do you know?
I think probably in the late 70s, early 80s, maybe. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure of the dates.
Do you know of any stories of college mischief involving the trains?
Yeah. It was one time, this was after the girls were here, a girl decided to try to touch the train. I think she lost her arm. Maybe college students have gotten smarter. I guess the problems with college students and their railroad track 9 times out of 10 has involved alcohol. When they're in their right minds, they usually know to respect the train.
So how did you travel around in Ashland when you were growing up?
Bicycle, walking, and roller skating. Oh gosh, we roller skated everywhere. Very few families had more than one car, and the father took the car and went off to work. So, I mean, you didn't have cars to drive around. There were a few affluent people who had 2 cars, but my family wasn't that affluent. And so that when you had to wait till your daddy came home from work at night, maybe you'd be lucky enough to get to use the car and drive around for a while, but mostly on foot, bicycles, roller skating. Yeah, there were buses. There was a bus that ran to Richmond. You could ride the bus to Richmond. It stopped in front of what is now the Henry Clay Inn. And I know my mom would give me, this is in the 40s, my mom would give me like 50 cents. And I could ride the bus round trip to Richmond. I could eat lunch at Woolworth's counter and go to the movies on 50 cents. But again, I didn't get to do that every week because 50 cents was not easy to come by. But that was a real treat. Go to Millen Roads and Tallhammer's department stores downtown. Didn't have the money to buy anything, but just walk around and window shop.
Did a lot of townspeople and college students go downtown?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Now, college students hitchhiked. That was how they got to Richmond. And I mean, if you wanted to really do anything or be a part of any night scene, there wasn't even much night scene in Richmond in those days. But if you wanted to do anything, go to where there were more movie theaters and that sort of thing, then you would go. And the college students would stand out on Route 1. This is before 95. Stand out on Route 1 and hitchhike, put their thumbs out and hitchhike. And anybody that knew that they were Randolph-Macon students would pick them up. And then there was a place on Route 1 at Brook Run today that was called Kelly's Truck Stop, and that's where the students would stand there by Kelly's Truck Stop and hitchhike coming home. And I mean, even me in high school and in college, I would stop and pick up college students. I mean, today I would never pick up a hitchhiker, but in those days I would stop and pick them up because they were Randolph-Macon students, so you knew they were good. So you picked them up and brought them back to town.
Well, now it seems like every college student owns a car.
Oh, at least one.
What do you feel about that?
I think it's very difficult to find a parking place between September and June. That's why coming down today, it was so nice coming down because, I mean, I knew I'd be able to find a parking place if this had been when the school year was going on. But you just adapt. You know that. So you adapt to it. And when you have a function, for example, you have a wedding at Duncan Memorial or something, you just tell people, look, there aren't any parking places. Just, park your car anywhere you can. You just have to make do.
Do you have a lot of experience with using the train service in Ashland?
Yes. Again, when I was working in Richmond, those years that I was working in Richmond, I used to ride the train, and also my husband used to ride the train back and forth to Richmond to work. And we're talking in the 50s and into the 60s. You could get on the train and go into Richmond and then take a bus in Richmond to get where you wanted to go. And now, use the train a lot if you want to go. Well, when my husband was still working, he would go to Washington. He had to go to Washington, D.C. on business quite frequently, and he would take the train to Washington. And now we go to New York on the train. If we want to go up for a few days, see some shows, we go on the train. So yes, train is very, very useful.
Do you do a lot of traveling?
Oh, yes. Yes, since we've retired, we've traveled large portion of the world.
Did any interesting characters ever stop off the train at the Ashland station?
Not that I know of. Now, I do know that the train came through when I believe it was Lyndon Johnson was running for president. And he was not on board, but Lady Bird was. I remember that. And I do remember when Franklin Roosevelt died in Warm Springs, Georgia, and his body was being transported back to Washington, D.C., a lot of people thought that train, that funeral train, would be coming through Ashland. And a lot of people gathered down on the railroad tracks. That was in 1945, April of 1945. But the train didn't come through Ashland. I don't know if it went through the Doswell line or another line, but it did not come through Ashland. But I remember a lot of people thinking it was going to come through and gather down at the railroad track. Because, of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had been president of the United States. He was elected in 1932, and he died in 1945. It was during that time, of course, that we changed the Constitution, that you cannot now occupy that office for more than 2 elected terms. And it was because of his being in office so long. But he was president from the time I was born until I was 13 years old. So that's the only president that I had ever known. Yeah, but no, I don't remember. People have told stories. People around here love to make up stuff. And they've told stories about the Pope getting off the train here and all that sort of stuff. But they're just stories people made up.
So people like to watch the train a lot?
Oh, yeah, and take pictures. All the time you can come, particularly on Sunday morning when we're going to church. Almost always there's somebody down on at the College Avenue crossing with the tripod and the expensive camera set up and taking pictures of the train coming through. And that was true in the olden days of the steam engine, too.
Did you ever know anyone who worked for the train station?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I knew some people who, conductors and people. There was a man that met the train, met the mail train. He had a great big cart that he would pull himself up the street from the post office next to the movie theater. He would pull the cart up the street, and they would throw the mail bags off the train, and he'd load them on the cart, and he'd take them back to the post office and then open them up, and they'd sort the mail out. And that was, every day, probably a couple of times. I don't know how often the mail was brought through town on the train. And then we had the station master, and the station was open. Today, the station is an information bureau. But in those days, it was the train stations where you bought your tickets, and it was segregated. It was whites on one side, blacks on the other. Black water fountain, white water fountain. Until, I assume, well, they they had a period of time that the trains did not stop here, probably in the 70s and 80s, I guess. And then train traffic was resumed. But you still don't buy a ticket at the station. You buy a ticket online, or you can buy a ticket over the telephone, or you can buy a ticket once you get on the train. But they don't sell tickets here anymore.
Did you used to like buying tickets right there at the desk, or do you prefer buying them online?
Doesn't make any difference.
Okay. Let's see. So right now, what do you do for fun in Ashland?
What do I do for fun in Ashland? Well, not much. You have your own set of friends, and you have, parties and things, but and we come to events at Randolph-Macon a lot. But other than that, there's not that much. But I must realize that I'm a senior citizen, advanced in age, you'd get totally different answer from young people. Yeah.
Are there any specific events you attend at the college?
Always come to homecoming and always come to graduation and the old grads reunion, because my husband is a graduate of Randolph-Macon. And we do attend some sporting events and cultural events. We come to the symphony, we come to plays, art openings, and things of that nature. We do attend those. Mm-hmm.
Are there any organizations you're a member of?
Yes. Over the years, I've belonged to quite a few organizations in town. When I was younger, the Ashland Junior Women's Club, and belonged to the Henry Clay Women's Club, and so forth. Today, the only organization that I belong to here in town, other than the church, is the Women's Club of Ashland, which is an organization that was founded in 1896. It's comprised of women, exclusively women. It was founded by several women in 1896. The women were primarily connected to men at Randolph-Macon College. In those days, there were very few outlets for women, intelligent women. And many Randolph-Macon College professors had married, college-educated, very intelligent women. And the role of a woman in those days was to stay home, keep the house, take care of the kids. Well, these women had broad interests. They were very bright. They were well educated. And so they got together and they formed a group called the Women's Club of Ashland. They met, and we still do, meet every Tuesday afternoon, starting the first Tuesday in October and going through the last Tuesday in April. Every Tuesday afternoon from 4 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Each member, there are 35 members of the club. There are a slate of officers, and there are 3 people on a program committee and 3 people on a social committee. If you are not serving in one of those positions, then you are expected to present a 1-hour paper. And that's what the programs are. We each do a paper, and that takes up all the Tuesdays. We only meet the first Tuesday in December, and then we don't meet again until the first Tuesday in January. So if you take the 35 women and take out the committees and the offices, then you have just enough people to each person to present a paper each Tuesday afternoon. And in the olden days, you were assigned a topic. You were given a topic that you had to do your paper on. Today, you're allowed to have your own topic. But we publish a yearbook, and you put your topic in there, and then you are responsible for that program on that particular day. And the programs last usually from 45 minutes to an hour on a variety of subjects. You can do anything you want to, but it's an outgrowth of those early women who were looking for a cultural and intellectual outlet. And so we look at it today in that same way, that it's a cultural and intellectual outlet for those of us who belong to it.
What kind of topics have you written about?
Well, my very first one, I wrote about sleep. I was teaching psychology at the time in high school, and I wrote a paper about the stages of sleep. That was my very first one. Then I have done multiple things. I have done biographies. I've done Branwell Bronte, the Charlotte and Anne and Emily's brother that most people don't know that much about. I've done a partial biography of Stonewall Jackson, because we had a member from the northern states who did a program on General Sherman, who's certainly not well thought of in the South, and I thought I needed to give equal time to the South, so I did Stonewall Jackson. My last paper I did on Sissy of Austria. She was a princess in Austria. I have done a paper on synchronicity. I've done a paper on Victoria Woodhull, the first woman to ever be taken seriously as a candidate for president of the United States. I have done a paper on stress. I've done a paper on humor. I've done a paper on Stephen Foster, the musician. So a variety of topics. This year, 1969, I'm going to do, and this is a secret, so nobody can know about this now, but this will be listened to later. I plan to do my paper on the 40 years it's been and what life was like in 1969 in Ashland when we had our first full year of integration of schools. So that's going to be my topic. I have to do mine February the 24th, I think is the date, 2009.
That'll be very interesting, especially with the 150th.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, do you have any special memories from being a part of this club?
Oh, absolutely. I've learned so much. It's a club that I knew about my whole life, but I never knew how you got into it. And I now know that you don't ask to belong to this club. You get invited to join this club. And I've heard absolutely marvelous papers over the years. I've been in it since I was elected in the spring of 1983. And so many of the women who presented papers in those years have passed on. And I was so glad that I got to know them in a different way and be a part of their sharing their knowledge with me. So I'm so happy about that. And just wonderful stories of Ashland. And the papers that have been done in the Women's Club and the history of the Women's Club is, I think there is an archives here at the Randolph-Macon Library that has all that information. The Women's Club of Ashland celebrated its 100th year in 1996, and I happened to be president of the organization at that time. And we had wonderful papers about memories of Ashland, and I know that they are archived here at the college.
Have there been any major changes in the organization of the club?
No, absolutely not. That group does not accept change readily. As I said, we still meet on Tuesday afternoons at 4 o'clock for 1 hour. There are no refreshments. You come in, you do your paper, you leave. The election process is the way it was done back in 1896. No, they do not. And anytime anybody thinks of coming up with some modern, newfangled way of doing things, it gets voted down immediately. There's no reason to change.
Do men and women have separate organizations?
Well, the Women's Club of Ashland is the only one I know that's exclusively for women. Nowadays, most of the other civic clubs have, although I assume the Henry Clay Women's Club still just has women. I don't belong to it anymore. And I know but I know the Kiwanis Club, for example, and Rotary and Ruritan and those Lions Club, they're all both sexes.
Are there any specific clubs that have had a major impact on the community as far as fundraising?
Well, I think the Kiwanis Club has always been well respected in this community. I don't belong to the Kiwanis Club, but I've known a lot of people who have, and I think they've been a major influence on this community. And maybe at some point somebody will interview somebody that knows a lot more about that. But I would say that's probably over the years the one that I remember the most.
What about the Strawberry Fair and the parades?
The Strawberry Fair, good friend of mine, Taffy Yurty, who was from St. Louis, Missouri, and then who was on Broadway in New York, and then came to work at the Whole Progress in Ashland, was the instigator of the Strawberry Fair. She was the one that came up with the original idea. I think maybe she had seen something similar done in another community. And it has grown exponentially until it's just huge with, I don't know, close to 300 booths and things. Now, this year, of course, it was so incredibly hot that it was not as well attended as it has been some other years. But yeah, that's a major undertaking by the town, and people really look forward to that, and we're known for that. Then we have our Christmas parade. We used to have a Santa Claus train. The Santa Claus train that ran from Richmond to Ashland originated through the department store here in Ashland. They're the one that started it. And then later on, one of the larger department stores in Richmond picked up on it, but it actually started with an idea out here. And so the holiday parade, I guess they call it now, is still a tradition that goes on. But those are things that I went to a lot when I was younger, and I just don't do as much anymore.
I want to ask you a little bit about your current involvement with the college, especially with the Bass Family Scholarship.
Well, because of the fact that my husband graduated from college here, and that we've lived here all this time, and that the original reason my parents came to Ashland to begin with, we've always felt a close emotional connection to Randolph-Macon. And because of that, and my husband was a scholarship student. He could not have come to Randolph-Macon without scholarships. Then we wanted to give something back to the college, and so therefore we established the Bass Family Scholarship. We did that in discussions with we have 3 children. We did that in discussions with our children, and they were all in agreement that was something that we wanted to do as a family, and that we named it the Bass Family Scholarship because of that. And it's mainly thank you for money that my husband received in the 1950s, early 1950s, and trying to pay back.
Is he involved with any other organizations?
Oh, yes.
Pertaining to the school?
Oh, yeah. He's been on the alumni board. He's been chairman of the homecoming committee for so many years, I can't even remember. He's not chairman anymore. He's right now serving as president of the Boydton Society, which is the old graduates. Anytime anybody at the college calls him and asks him to do anything, he jumps at the chance. He loves it. And me too. I'm on the Arts Council at Randolph-Macon at the moment. That's the only position, I guess, that I serve in over here. But anytime anybody from the college asks us to do anything, we don't even think about it. We just say yes immediately.
Tell me a little bit more about the Arts Council.
The Arts Council was started some years ago to promote cultural and artistic things here at the college, and right now it is evolving into a Friends of the Art program, which is being set up as we speak. And it's the main thing is to promote cultural and artistic events here at Randolph-Macon, whether it be drama, music, art, whatever. It's just a way of showcasing the college to the wider community, including Richmond.
I bet the community really appreciates that.
Well, I hope so. We hope so.
How does it feel to live in the center of the universe?
It's the best place in the world to live. It's the best place in the world to live. Now, the center of the universe was coined by our ex-mayor, Dick Gillis. And it's caught on, and it's wonderful. And everywhere, and we do travel, my husband and I do travel a lot, and everywhere we go, when people say, where are you from? We tell them the center of the universe. And, of course, then they don't know where that is, so we have to explain it to them.
Are there any other things you'd like to share? Any stories? Or?
Oh, gee, I don't know. I think we've about covered everything. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head right now, unless you can think of something. I think we've done a pretty good job from my childhood on up. I guess I would like to mention my 3 children.
Stephen, the oldest son, it was born, the one that I had to stop teaching school for. He was born in 1957, and he now lives in Short Pump in Richmond, and is married and has a 13-year-old son. And he grew up here, and he went to Randolph, went to Patrick Henry High School. He also went to Randolph-Macon Academy for a while. And then my daughter Allison Bass brought us, and she is divorced, but she has 2 children. Bates, who's a farmer in Caroline County, and Candace, who is a senior at Virginia Tech. And Allison lives in Ashland and is currently employed as a manager at Ace Hardware. And then my youngest child is Warren, and at the moment he lives in Country Club Hills in Ashland, and he is a financial planner, and he is married to Jennifer, who is a graduate of Randolph-Macon College in the class of 95, and they have one son, Chip, who has just finished 2nd grade at Henry Clay School, the 3rd generation of the family to go to Henry Clay School. And they are getting ready to move to Roanoke in July. So, at least I wanted to get all those people in.
Have they liked living in Ashland?
Oh, I think so. My, as I said, they all traveled around and they all went different places, but they ended up close back by home, so they must have liked it.
Okay, for my final question, what do you think makes Ashland so special?
People. The people that live here. And that is a large part of that is the college, because new people come in all the time with new ideas. But it's the people. And I'm sure that's true wherever you live. Whether you live in the center of the universe or wherever you live, it's the people that make the place special.
Well, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. Thank you.